Hello everyone, this is Rose. Today's topic from the Book of Life is Rose's discussion with her psychologist. This is an excerpt from the book A Thirst That Never Ceases by author Judy Owens. It reads as follows. Rose arrived 10 minutes early for her first council meeting with Dr. Ruth. Rose, this being her first time, didn't know how counseling worked and therefore felt a little uncomfortable. She began to question herself if this was a good decision. After reminiscing about her conversation with Barbara, her best friend of 40 years, she noticed the nervousness was gone. Dr. Ruth came out personally to call Rose into her office. She asked Rose to have a seat on the couch. Rose observed the room was not the same office where she and Janice, her daughter, met with Dr. Ruth for the consultation. The initial meeting office was large. It had a long cherry wood desk with 3 French conventional chairs facing the desk. Along the wall were 2 cherry wood bookshelves filled with books, framed pictures, and awards. Rose noticed how warm and cozy the counseling office was as she waited on Dr. Ruth to get situated. The room was filled with pastel colors. The only furniture was a couch and 2 end tables, a center table, and a large French conventional chair that faced the couch. In the corner of the room was a small refrigerator. One end table was next to the couch and the other end table was next to the chair. Dr. Ruth took a seat in the chair after picking up the laptop from the end table next to the chair. She offered Rose a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Rose declined but thanked her for the offer. There was an awkward moment of silence. Dr. Ruth looked at Rose before saying, "There is nothing to be nervous about. We are going to talk about life. Let's start with your first marriage. Feel free to verbalize your life story." Rose thought out loud. Well, let's see. I was working at a law firm as a paralegal when I met my first husband, James. The firm was looking to hire and decided to set up interviews with potential candidates who had recently passed their bar exam. In walked James into the law firm as my coworker and I researched through legal books and documents for a case one of the lawyers was working on. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, looking finer than wine in his 3-piece suit. My coworker Brenda and I was hypnotized by his presence. We stared without blinking for 60 seconds. James turned in our direction, smiled and nodded his head as he walked towards the receptionist's desk. The receptionist asked him to have a seat as she informed the attorney that his 10 o'clock appointment had arrived. During lunch, Brenda and I discussed if we thought James had the job or not. Not only was Brenda my coworker, she was one of my best friends from high school. We both went to paralegal school together. We were also roommates. We shared a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. In those days, it was cheaper to split the rent on a 2-bedroom than separately rent a 1-bedroom. We both felt so blessed to find jobs with the same firm fresh out of school. Brenda and I did not find out James was hired until a week later, when he came back into the firm carrying a small box of personal items. Although Brenda and I were young, we both knew and discussed it was not good to date anyone where we worked. One day, while at work, 6 months after James was hired, Brenda asked me why James was always talking to me at work. I looked at her in a state of shock because he talked to everyone in the office. I told her, "I don't understand your question." I asked Brenda, was he not supposed to talk to me? Brenda blurted out, "I think he likes you." I disagreed with Brenda because he never told me he liked me or asked me out on a date. But 2 weeks after our conversation, James stopped me at work as I was walking to my car. He asked me how I felt about dating someone I work with. I told him it was not good because it could affect a professional relationship. He then asked how I felt about socializing with someone I worked with after work hours. I told James I was okay with it as long as the relationship was strictly platonic. Dr. Ruth interjected, "Did you find James attractive?" "Yes," Rose replied. "Were you concerned socializing with someone you wanted to date, that wanted to date you, and who you find attractive would lead to something more than platonic?" asked Dr. Ruth. I thought about it for a quick second, but told myself James understood from our conversation that I was not looking to take the relationship outside of a friendship among co-workers. After all, I socialize with others in the office after work. After Rose's remark, Dr. Ruth asked, How did your relationship with James become more than platonic?" Our initial socializing after work started as a group with other coworkers. We all would occasionally meet in the bar area of a local restaurant for happy hour. After a couple of months of socializing with James among the group, I allowed my guard to come down and no longer felt our friendship was in threat of changing into an intimate relationship. The one day after leaving the bar, James asked me to walk to my car with me. He wanted to walk me to my car. It was dark outside, so I agreed. When I got in my car, James leaned in and kissed me. To my surprise, I kissed him back. James smiled and nodded as he told me to have a good night. That night, I couldn't sleep from thinking about what happened. I realized I was harboring feelings for James that I had suppressed. I felt like I had awakened within myself a sleeping giant with one kiss. I began to ask myself, How do I close this emotional door? I felt like my entire being was filled in an instant from one kiss with emotions I did not know was in me. The next day at work was awkward. I tried to avoid James. I had no one to talk to about the situation. I couldn't talk to Brenda because there was no way she would believe the kiss between James and me came as a surprise to me. Immediately after work, James called me at home. Brenda was out on a date with a guy she met 2 months ago. James and I talked about what happened. He told me how much he liked me and wanted to move our relationship from the friend zone to dating. I had never felt so much bubbly inside for anyone, which made it hard for me to say no. I never had a serious boyfriend. I allowed my emotions to guide my decisions with James from that point of the kiss to the end of our relationship. James and I started secretly dating. I was falling deep fast. 3 months after dating James, he asked to come to my apartment. He knew I shared an apartment with Brenda. He asked if Brenda's boyfriend comes to our apartment. I could hear the hurt in his voice when I said yes. So knowing that Brenda was going to be on a date on Friday with her boyfriend, I told James to come on Friday. James arrived on time. I poured us both a glass of wine. As we cuddled on the couch, watching TV, Brenda walked through the door. I jumped. She looked back and forth from me to James. James' greeting of hi to Brenda was met with a look of grimness from her to him. Brenda headed to her bedroom without saying a word. James asked me, "What is that all about?" As I was explaining to James why I kept our relationship a secret from Brenda, she re-entered the living room wearing a sexy black negligee. She tells James, "This is what you are missing by choosing Rose over me." I was so angry I began to cry. James stood up, looked at me and said, "Now I understand. We will talk later. Don't let this vex your spirit." He kissed me, then left. Brenda ran back to her bedroom. I could hear her crying. The next day, she apologized to me, and I gave her my 30-day notice. Our relationship shifted from best friends to professional co-workers. James asked me to move in with him, and I did. James and I eloped 6 months after living together, which was approximately a year and 7 months after he walked into the firm for an interview. After marrying James, I submitted my 2 weeks resignation to my boss. Brenda's boyfriend moved in with her. James and I gave birth to James Jr. 2 years after getting married. Our marriage prior to James Jr. was good. We were so in love with each other and showed it in affection every day. I became less affectionate after JJ, James Jr., was born. Going to night school and working a full shift at work and at home became very draining. I was tired all the time. James Sr. sought out the affection he was missing at home with other women. Adding this emotional hurt to my workload made things worse in my marriage. When JJ was 4 years of age, I knew my marriage was in serious threat of dissolution. I thought having another child would save our marriage. James Sr. was furious when I told him we were pregnant. He asked me to have an abortion. Shortly after JJ's 5th birthday, when I was 8 months pregnant, James Sr. served me with divorce papers. Janice was born a month later without her father to welcome her into this world. Dr. Ruth took notes as Rose talked about her life. She intervened to let Rose know that her hour was up. She stated that next week she would like for them to discuss Rose's emotional state after the dissolution of her marriage. The second counseling section is now starting with Rose and Dr. Ruth. And it reads as follows. Once Rose was settled with coffee in her hand, Dr. Ruth asked Rose to talk about her divorce from James Sr. James serving me with divorce papers during my pregnancy was devastating. I questioned myself about so many things in my life, trying to figure out what went wrong. My emotions were all over the place. I wondered if James really loved me when we got married. I thought maybe he confused lust with love. What made you wonder if he loves you rather than love you? Asked Dr. Ruth. I say this because the problem in our marriage started after JJ was born, and I was too tired to keep up with our sexual intimacy. Our intimacy went from 4 times or more a week to once a week. James constantly complained about the lack of sexual intimacy. He refused to acknowledge the increase in my workload. He had no interest in understanding what I was going through. When I realized our marriage was in trouble, I asked James if he would allow our pastor to counsel us. James' reply was, "No man is going to tell me how to live my life. I am not a little boy who needs to run to someone on how to be a man." James was missing the point I was making, and he totally disregarded any discussion as I tried to bring clarity to my thoughts. James felt that as a woman, I was programmed to be superhuman. James would often say God created woman from the rib of man, whereas he created man from the dust of the ground. He felt God gave woman strength to bear the responsibilities of working in and out of the home, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids without lacking in giving her husband sexual intimacy. He felt the man role is to have dominion over his wife, his household, and to work. James felt when God told the woman in Genesis 3:16 of the Bible, "Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee," he was talking about sexual intimacy. What does the scripture mean to you? Asked Dr. Ruth. I believe the entire scripture is God's reprimand to the woman for dishonoring the command told to her from Adam. This is the first command God gave to man in Genesis 2:16 and 17, which is to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Woman dishonored her husband Adam by honoring the serpent. When man ate of the fruit from the forbidden tree that the woman gave to him, he dishonored God. Man's reprimand is shown in Genesis 3:22 through 24. I believe the scripture is telling woman that her desire should be to honor her husband as he guides with godly commands by not allowing the influence of the adversary to cause her to dishonor him. Also, I believe the scripture tells man to not allow the influence of his wife to cause him to dishonor God's commandments. Rose, it's understandable your emotions were all over the place during your pregnancy. It is a scientific fact that pregnancy affects emotions due to the higher levels of both estrogen and progesterone. However, just because the emotions cause moments of sadness and anxiety doesn't mean you cannot trust your perceptions on life's circumstances, especially when you are using godly principles to guide you. The beautiful thing about Christ is that his sacrifice allows us as individuals to go behind the veil directly to God in his name. Do you feel going directly to God for understanding that godly principles is dishonoring your husband? No, Dr. Ruth, I do not. However, James had a way of making me feel guilty when I do not believe his interpretation of the scripture. You should not feel guilty for seeking God's guidance for understanding when your husband's perception of the scripture complexes or vexes your spirit. You are not at that moment seeking to hear and obey the voice of the adversary. What made you agree to the divorce by signing the papers? I thought about all the times James cheated on me with different women and the effect of unsafe sexual intimacy with James due to his multiple partners. I thought about the unhealthiness of my emotional state in my pregnancy and as a mother to my son JJ. My desire to provide a mentally healthy, stable home for my kids overruled my desire to hold on to a man who doesn't want me or the child I was carrying. After the divorce was finalized, I put all my focus on my kids and healing from the loss. I gave in to whatever James' commands were in the divorce. What were James' commands? Asked Dr. Ruth. James agreed to pay child support for JJ. He only agreed to pay child support for Janice after a paternity test confirmed he is the father. He asked for weekend visitations with JJ at his home. He asked that I waive my rights to spousal support. He asked to keep our home. After the divorce, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with my newborn daughter and my son. When I was married to James, I was taking night classes at the local community college and later at the state university. After attaining an Associate of Arts degree in business accounting, and a bachelor's degree in business management, I continued to work as a paralegal because I wasn't ready to make a change in career. I didn't feel I was psychologically ready to give my thoughts to something new. How long were you single before meeting and marrying your second husband? Asked Dr. Ruth. But let's save this question for our next session. Our time is up. The next section with Dr. Ruth, section 3, has begun, and it reads as follows. Dr. Ruth escorted Rose into her office. I am well. Hello, Rose. How are you feeling? I am well, Dr. Ruth. It has been a long week. Anything you care to discuss in this week's section? Well, it's nothing that warrants counseling. I started a nonprofit for unwed moms. What inspired you to start a nonprofit? Asked Dr. Ruth. I was inspired after our last counseling section. Discussing my divorce from James caused me to reflect on how alone I felt becoming a single mom with 2 young kids. I am grateful I had my full-time job as a paralegal and child support to help. Nevertheless, I was financially burdened due to childcare. It took a long time before I could financially move into a larger place. Janice was almost 4 years when I rented a small 3-bedroom house. I didn't know where to seek resources that aid in finding reasonable child care programs. I was psychologically drained and felt as if I needed someone with a clear mind to think for me. The nonprofit would be a one-stop resource center that caters to unwed mothers' various needs. Rose, I have several colleagues in the medical field who would love to donate time and money toward the welfare of the unwed moms. Let's talk about this again after you are up and running. In the meantime, I will put together a list of medical professionals who currently assist pro bono. Let's start where we left off last week. We ended with me asking you a question. How long were you single before meeting and marrying your second husband? Dr. Ruth, I was single long before my divorce from James was final. I was divorced over 4 years when I met Craig. Craig and I met at JJ's 10th birthday party. Craig is the cousin of my best friend Barbara. He came to JJ's birthday party with his 10-year-old nephew. Because the party was hosted at Barbara's house, I asked her to invite her family members with their kids. At the party, Craig introduced himself and thanked me for allowing him and his nephew to share in the festivities. Craig and I spent the entire party talking to each other. He is a friendly, kind-hearted man who loves to talk. He is totally opposite to James in looks. He isn't tall. He isn't dark, muscular built, or handsome. Craig is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a medium size and a pop belly with facial blemishes. The warmth and gentleness of his spirit is what drew me to him. Craig owns several auto body shops. He had never been married but was engaged once. His family and friends finally convinced him that his fiancée was using him for his money. She had 4 kids and a boyfriend on the side. Craig was mesmerized by her beauty. It wasn't until her boyfriend confronted Craig that he realized she did not love him. Craig called me every day after JJ's party. We never missed a day. Each day we would talk at least 30 minutes on the phone, sometimes more. I never had this type of relationship with a man. I did not know any man this caring or compassionate. There wasn't anything that we couldn't talk about. 8 months after meeting Craig, we were having dinner at one of my favorite restaurants when he asked me to marry him. I was frozen and couldn't speak. Craig asked me if I was okay. I told him I didn't see the question of marriage coming, and I needed time to digest what he had asked me. Unlike James, Craig was a spiritual man who went to church at least 2 Sundays out of a month, and Bible study every Wednesday evening he went. After taking a week to pray and to meditate on Craig's proposal, I could see clearly how easy it was to say yes to James and question if Craig was the right person for me. I was attracted to James for all the wrong reasons. I was attracted to his looks, his height, his charm, and his profession. James was not a communicator with me. We would sit and watch TV together without engaging in conversation with each other. We would go out to dinner on a date and talk only 10% of the time while we are waiting on the food to be served. Once the food comes, the conversation stopped. Our conversations were about work after JJ was born. Our conversations were arguing about what I wasn't doing for him as a wife. I kept asking myself why I loved this man. So in my quiet time, I asked myself, why am I questioning if Craig was the right person? He is considerate of my feelings, my time, my kids, and all that matters to me. He listens and responds in conversation. He opened doors for me. He pulled out my chair before I sit. He carries heavy things for me. He is handy around the house. For all these reasons and more, I told Craig yes 2 weeks after his marriage proposal to me. Craig wanted to elope with me and the kids to Las Vegas. He did not want the naysayers to have a say in our decision. 9 months after meeting Craig, we were married in a private Las Vegas ceremony with only the kids in attendance. We later had a party to commence our marriage with family and friends. Rose, how did the kids feel about you marrying Craig? Asked Dr. Ruth. JJ was excited about having Craig join the family. 4 months after I married Craig, JJ told me he had a dream that Craig would ask me to marry him. In his dream, James Sr. told JJ that it was okay for his mom to marry Craig, that Craig would be a good addition to the family, and he would spend a lot of time with him. James asked JJ to be patient with Janice because she was still healing emotionally. He told JJ that I would have a child with Craig. I was extremely surprised when JJ shared this dream with me months later. As a kid, JJ was very much like his dad, a person who communicated very little. I told JJ that God speaks to us in many different ways, and God was using his dad's image to talk to him in a dream. Rose, what made you tell JJ it was God who was talking to him in a dream? Because JJ told me about the dream right after I made a doctor's appointment to see if I was pregnant. The appointment was made earlier in the day at work, and JJ told me that evening after dinner. I did not mention to anyone about the appointment. The comment JJ made about Janice was true. She did not receive Craig into the family the way JJ had. I believe too many emotional changes occurred to Janice soon after her dad came into her life. She met her dad for the first time at JJ's 10th birthday party. He embraced her after seeing how much she looks like his mother. Her dad not only came but planned her 5th birthday party. She finally started to spend time with her dad, which was short-lived. A year and 3 months after spending time with her dad, he dies. Less than a year after her dad died, I was marrying Craig and was expecting another child. Chloe was born 7 months after Janice's 7th birthday. Chloe's dad was present. He was present for her birth and was excited about welcoming his only child into the world. Rose then began to cry. Dr. Ruth handed Rose some tissue and gave her a moment to release the emotions with her tears. Rose, I need you to put this emotional breakthrough into words so that it loses hold on you. I never thought this deep about what Janice went through as a kid without her father. And when he finally came into her life, all these emotional changes took place. I feel guilty for not seeing it sooner and for being a contributor. How could I not allow my child time to heal before I added more to her plate? What kind of mother am I to not see what I was putting my child through? You have to remember, Rose, you and Janice were in the same place. You were too wounded to naturally see Janice's wounds. Spiritually, you were in tune with Janice. This is why she is spiritually strong. You gave her what she needed spiritually to stand against the fiery darts of the wicked, even if it was your darts the adversary was using. From a child up, you taught Janice how to put on the whole armor of God, that she may be able to stand and not crash. Thank you, Dr. Ruth. I needed to hear this and see Janice's emotional wounds. Let's end this week's section here. Next week, I would like for us to talk more about your marriage to Craig. This is the end of the reading of the excerpt of Rose's counseling section with Dr. Ruth. There are other counseling sections that continues in the book called A Thirst That Never Ceases. The book can be purchased at barnesandnobles.com as well as amazon.com. Click the thumbs up and the subscribe button to receive notifications of more articles from the Book of Life. Be blessed and safe. Peace.